Welcome to Proof of PR, your passport to the world of public relations for Bitcoin and Web3. I'm your host, Kelly Weaver, CEO of Melrose PR, a leading provider of communications and PR strategy in our unique industry. Get ready for an inside look into the future of finance, technology, and entrepreneurship from those driving innovation in the space. Join us as we learn how they generate headlines, cut through the noise, and grow their brand awareness through media placements, press mentions, and thought leadership. These are the stories behind their success. This is Proof of PR.
Today we're joined by award-winning journalist, author, co-founder of Opening Bell Daily, and founder of Journalist Club, Phil Rosen. Thank you so much for joining today. Super excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
I want to start by saying you are probably one of my favorite people in this space. You're super authentic and super intelligent, and you have an awesome sense of humor. And I just am so grateful that I'm able to know you and work with you. And I'm so happy to have you on today.
That's a lot to live up to. I will certainly do my best. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So when we first met, you were at Business Insider, and I would love to start the conversation by hearing about how you entered into the world of journalism and how you got your start at Business Insider. So yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I don't have a traditional journalism or media background. I went to school actually as essentially a pre-med student. And I finished that degree, but during the second half of college, I knew I wanted to try as hard as I could to be a writer, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I didn't even follow the news. I wasn't involved in media. I didn't write for the school paper. All I knew was that, okay, I want to be writing every day and getting paid for it somehow, whatever that might look like. That eventually led me to starting a blog, and I was just writing essentially a travel blog. So I was living in Hong Kong after college, teaching English. And then that's how I got my first job at a newspaper, because someone found my blog and hired me. So that sort of was my first step into journalism. With the internet, especially, you can really write yourself into the job that you want. And even if you don't have experience or, I didn't have any internships or letters of rec, it was just, I had a blog full of essays, and that's what got me my foot in the door, pretty much.
It sounds like you started with a passion, and that passion then led you to writing professionally because your passion kind of spoke for itself, which is really cool. And that's really awesome to hear.
A huge advantage I've had is that I go to work and I write, and then I clock out of work, and then I write as my hobby and the projects I'm working on outside of work. It's just always been that way. And I think it took me a few years to realize that was a huge edge I had as far as developing my skills and figuring out how to get ahead. I just had so many hours under my belt and reps under my belt because I was writing before work and after work and at work.
How many hours do you spend writing, do you think, roughly, between newsletters and just all the different areas of writing that you do?
I would say when I was working at Business Insider, I was writing all day, and then an hour outside of work each day to also be writing. Okay. So, full-time job plus about, I'd say like on average over 7 days, probably 45 minutes a day extra. So actually not that much. Like, it doesn't sound like that much, but I think really just doing that for years and years and years is what gave me that sort of muscle memory or my 10,000 hours, I suppose, is because that really compounds over time. All the effort writing outside of the day job, I think really, has been good for me.
I would love to hear more about the books and how you kind of just realized you wanted to start a book or write a few books, and just hear more about that kind of process.
Yeah, my first book, it's called Everywhere But Home. And that is a travel memoir based on when I was living in Southeast Asia. And that one is actually a compilation of my essays that I was writing on my travel blog for almost 2 years. And I didn't actually set out to write a book when I started. It just, I was writing so consistently that I sort of realized I had over 200 pages of work. And it was all about the same thing, which was, a combination of travel and sort of coming of age as a college graduate that moved abroad. So that was like the theme of the book. And it's one of those things where if you just do something every day, then eventually you can like make something of it, I think. And that was the first book. And then the second book was more planned, and I was already at Business Insider by then. So I was a working journalist, and this was 2022. And that one was a collection of fiction short stories. I was only writing like 30 minutes a day of fiction, but then I had planned to put together these 12 short stories in a book. So I think by the end of maybe 10 months, I'd written maybe 20 short stories of fiction. And then I ended up putting 12 of them in a book and publishing it myself. And yeah, so that was, those were two of my side projects that actually became pretty cornerstone, like resume or portfolio pieces for me, pretty unintentionally, actually. I didn't realize they would be such big projects. But then, I think if you just chip away at anything in small bits, then it can get way bigger than you expect or than you plan.
Totally. Any plans for a third book?
Probably. I will say I'm not working on one at this second, but I would never close the door on more books. It's part of who I am. I'm gonna wake up and write anyway. So whether that turns into a book at some point, yeah, we will see.
Okay, so focusing on what you're working on now, you launched one of the most exciting newsletters in finance, Opening Bell Daily with Anthony Pompliano. Can you tell me a little bit about how you manifested this opportunity and the rapid growth of this newsletter?
Today was actually the end of our 5th week in business. The newsletter is the primary product right now, but it is a financial media outlet. And if, for some context, when I was at Business Insider, I was there almost 3 years, and most of my time and what I was hired to do there was to write our morning markets newsletter, which was 6 days a week. Yeah, it was one of the most popular or widely read financial newsletters in the industry. And so I had a lot of practice. I had a lot of reps doing it with, a team of editors and managers and sort of in the corporate newsroom structure. And it was great practice, great experience. And then the company, I think it was, some months ago, maybe last year, they actually closed down that product to pivot business strategies. I had this skill set and I wanted to apply it and use it and build something new. So that's what we're doing with Opening Bell Daily. It is a markets newsletter and covers finance, stocks, the economy, the Fed, pretty wide ranging. And it's a lot more of my view that is in there. So it's more of a column than straight reporting. Yeah, that's been really exciting to be able to sort of use those muscles again after some time at Business Insider.
Nice. So walk me through your routine each morning. Like, what news are you canvassing? Like, how do you, create the newsletter each morning? I'd love to hear more about that.
Pretty much read the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, the digital versions, but as best as I can, cover to cover, whatever that means online. But I read those very religiously. I am pretty good at reading the Financial Times as well. Between those three, I tend to have a good sense of what markets are doing and what economic data there is. And I also get a bunch of bank research in my inbox every day. So that's, I would say that's a bit more like in the weeds stuff, but gives me good background for how to write certain things based on knowing what Wall Street is thinking. And then, so that's usually my, a good chunk of my day is just reading, actually. Like taking in news from my favorite 3 like markets publications, and the 3 that I think are also just the most even-handed with their coverage. I usually make a few phone calls to sources. So I'm calling, investors or bankers or strategists, economists, just depending on what I feel like writing about for that day. And my sources will help me understand what to write about and also sort of steer my view on things and guide the coverage for the next morning. So I usually write in the evenings. Like I read all day, make my phone calls, do my interviews, and then the evenings I'll write for the next morning. yeah, that's sort of the process. And each newsletter is less than 1,000 words per edition. So takes about 5 minutes to read, but to write maybe takes me, a few hours to the actual pen to paper writing is maybe um, under 3 hours, but then coming up with the idea and reading all the information that comes before I can even start writing, that takes, many hours on its own. And yeah.
And what factors do you look for when you're developing relationships with sources? It sounds like you kind of have your go-to sources, but how did you create those relationships, and what do you look for when you're trying to develop them off the bat?
I would say it starts with a first phone call, and that's really the main thing. If you can get on the phone with the source and um, have a valuable exchange of ideas and conversation, and I think if you go in with specific questions, it's great. But also, what I like to do is try to keep it as open ended as possible, because usually, almost always, I have way more to learn than I expect, and because these are experts at what they do, and I'm certainly not. My job's not to be the expert. My job is to have access to the experts and sort of disseminate and distill their ideas. But then to find new sources, what I often do is I'll ask people I already know that are sources if they recommend anyone I speak to next. They are tapped into their own networks. So I'm sure the people in the industry are probably more well sourced than a journalist covering the industry, because those are just their peers instead of, for journalists, those would be sources. So something I like to do is asking my sources who they recommend I speak to. I use Twitter a lot to find sources, like whoever economist or strategist is tweeting about the news of the day or markets or the Fed, then sometimes I'll just DM them and ask to get on a call. So that's pretty common as well. And staying in touch with them over, months and years at this point is just a matter of regular calls, texts, interviews, checking in just to, a lot of times when I check in with sources, I'll just ask them what they're watching. Like, what are you monitoring these days? And where do you think I should be investigating right now? And those are all pretty helpful things that I try to do as regularly as I can.
Nice. And do you ever connect with a source through a cold pitch from a PR agency? If they're saying, we have this source we'd like for you to connect with, he can speak to X, Y, and Z. Is that something that piques your interest that then becomes a reliable source for you from those cold pitches?
I would say I've met quite a few sources that have become regular sources for me through PR contacts. If I had to put a number on it, maybe it's like 20% of the sources I speak with are through PR contacts. Okay. So then, in one sense, it's like the PR contact almost becomes a source as well, because they have, a certain level of access or clients, which can be helpful for a journalist covering a certain beat. One of the more common things that I do with PR contacts is, like, if there's a big Fed meeting that we know is on the calendar on a certain day, then we'll plan ahead of time to set up calls, like reaction calls to the Fed meeting, for example. So usually the most helpful thing for me with like pitches I get is to plan around specific dates where we know what's going to happen, or like an event on the calendar, pretty much, because otherwise the news moves almost too fast
so quickly.
Yeah, so it can be hard to plan in advance through PR. Like, usually if there's breaking news or I need to write about something and I can just call someone and they're on the line, that's faster than having a third party plan a meeting for us. But if there's something on the calendar that everyone knows is coming, then that's, I think, where PR people can be really helpful.
And with that, what has your experience been overall working with PR professionals, and what are some best practices for cultivating relationships with PR professionals as well?
I'd say the PR folks that I work with most are the ones I've met in person. So that might be through events, or they invite me for a coffee or something. And then when I can put a face to a name, I'm way more likely to open an email, for example. Like, my every journalist's inbox is packed with pitches. And if you're scrolling through, 100 emails in the morning from, and at least half of them are from PR people, you will stop on the ones where you've met them in person. At least I do. That's what I do. So if possible, I think PR folks should make the effort to meet the journalists they want to work with. And it just makes a huge difference because there's so much noise. And if you have a personal relationship, then you at least get the courtesy of, okay, like maybe this pitch won't work, but let's keep talking and maybe find an expert or find an angle that could work better for this publication. So it's the in-person meeting is definitely something I'd recommend.
And are there any emails or subject lines that have stood out to you via a pitch where you're like, okay, I'll open this and see what it's about? Like, are there any specific types of subject lines that are interesting to you that you've seen from PR folks?
So something that I do semi-regularly, I'll kind of put a call out for pitches. I'll say, hey, like on Twitter or LinkedIn, I'll say, here's my email. I'm looking for pitches on, XYZ. And then the ones I tend to open most are subject lines that say like, I saw your post on LinkedIn or I saw your post on X, because the subject line is not about the story. It's about like, hey, I saw you tweet this. Yeah. And that gets my attention a lot. And I almost always open
that kind of filters for you. That filters it a little bit better for you. So that they're paying attention to what you're tweeting about, and it will be specifically relevant to the call out that you put.
Totally. Because so many pitches that journalists get are just about nothing we've ever written about. So, I think I got one this morning about like, it's like your car is like breaking down and you need like new seats, and I was like, I've never written about like the chairs in your car before, and it's just like, this person clearly did not do any research. This was a mass email to their list.
Do you mentally log those types of people that are just sending you irrelevant pitches, and so you kind of know not to to open them, or does that kind of like a mental list that you have?
I don't have a mental list, but that might be a good idea to start making one. Usually it just gets immediately deleted. If I can tell right away, like this person didn't do any research and this person actually has no idea who I am or what I write about, instant delete. And then I think if you delete things often enough without opening, it just goes to spam eventually.
So pivoting a bit now, how do you keep up with the trends in the industry on the finance side, market side? Would be curious to hear about how you just stay up to date as much as possible, because it moves so quickly and you have to, keep an ear to the ground at all times. So how do you keep up with that?
I mean, a lot of that's just reading every day. Like I read so much information every single day. And I'm sure most journalists do. That's like the easiest answer. But then, maybe one step further is I'm always on the phone. I'm taking at least, a couple calls a day with people that work in the industry, asking them what I should be looking at, what they're looking at, what their colleagues are looking at. So that's something that's really helpful. I think just the combination of the reading and the conversations. But then, as part of my job, just writing about it every day, that's what keeps your muscles sharp, I think. It's like, okay, I know what's going on in the market because I write about it 5 days a week. Like that's as simple as it gets, I think. And it's like, if I did all the reading and I had all the phone calls, but I wasn't writing, I think I would have less of a grasp on the material, because the writing is the execution of the material. But like, if you're only taking in information, but then you don't have to put it to use or synthesize it in any way, I think it's a lot harder to know what's going on. So much of writing is actually like discovering, rather than it's not just putting your thoughts on paper. You're actually learning what to say as you go. And that discovery process is how you learn these things. It's not just, if we all had perfect transcription from our head to paper, then everyone would know everything already, and there'd be no one would have to read or write or anything. But because writing is such a process of, I don't know the material yet, but through writing is how I will learn it. Because putting your thoughts on paper, I would say like writing is just thinking, but forcing yourself to be really clear in your thinking. So if you can clarify your thoughts, that's just the most helpful thing you can do for yourself, I think.
That's a great muscle to exercise, because then it allows you to be more of an effective communicator when you're speaking to someone, because your thoughts are more organized, because you know how to articulate them well, on paper and when you're speaking to somebody. So I think that's really important, and I'm glad you highlighted that. Also, you're super passionate about building a community, and you launched the Journalist Club, and I would love to hear about that and what gave you the idea and what you guys are doing now.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm super excited to be working on. This was in February. I literally sent out a tweet and I said, hey, I want to, put together a group of journalists. And a few people responded. And then there wasn't that much traction, and probably looked super random, whatever. But then so a small group of us got dinner. There were about 10 of us journalists. Then I posted a photo of that dinner, and it gained a ton of traction on Twitter and LinkedIn. At this point, I think there's been 8 dinners and then 1 happy hour, which was 60 reporters from every major news outlet. So each dinner is 10 people, and that one event was 60. So, I've sat down for dinner or shared a drink with 100 something journalists at this point in a couple months, maybe 2.5 months.
That's incredible. That's
crazy fast scale. And I've met
that shows that there was such a need for it. Sorry to cut. It's just that shows that there's a huge gap that you're filling. So continue.
The demand was extraordinary right away, and I've met so many amazing reporters from every other newsroom. And, my sense when I started was, okay, I know all my coworkers at Business Insider at the time, and I would like to meet and make friends with people that don't work at my own company. And I think every reporter should want that, because I think the more people that do a similar job as you across the industry, it's just you have more people to commiserate with, to support you, and also immeasurable network effect, I think, of knowing a lot of people at a lot of companies in your own industry. And so these dinners are small. There's 10 people, and usually only one person. There won't be more than one person from a particular outlet that attends. That's typically how I try to organize it.
You're highly curating each dinner meeting. Okay, cool.
A lot of times there will be a theme. So the last dinner I did was mostly markets reporters, markets writers. And then I'm planning a next one for only newsletter operators. And that one I'm super excited for. These aren't networking events. Really, people show up, and it's not work. It's not networking. You're just, mostly it's, in its simplest way, it's sitting down with strangers that want new friends. The idea is the people that will choose to go to one of these dinners are there to make friends. And if you get a group of people that all want to make friends, probably walk away with a couple friends. And that's been, it's been really special. And I think it's, I think it's really important work. It's work for me, but for everyone else, it's just events that hopefully they can meet great people at. And I know I've met a lot of great people, and it's the most energizing thing that I do, having these events, and they're super fun. The dinners, I always put it'll be a 7 to 9 p.m. dinner, but almost always it goes to 10 or 11. And I think that's a great signal that no one wants to leave.
Time flies when you're having fun, as they say, in a super cliche way.
Totally.
Phil, this has been amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. And thank you again.
Thanks for tuning in to Proof of PR. This episode was brought to you by Melrose PR, a leading provider of communications and PR strategy for Bitcoin and Web3 innovators. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen today. To stay up to date on upcoming guests and news, visit proofofpr.com or follow us on Twitter @proofofpr. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and hodling.